I hereby welcome you to this hybrid meeting and declare this 103rd Annual Ordinary General Meeting of the shareholders of the South African Reserve Bank duly constituted in terms of the regulations framed under the South African Reserve Bank Act number 90 of 1989 as amended. This is the first time that the sub-AGM is held as a hybrid meeting. As stated in the notice of the meeting, the SAP is currently embarking on a renovation and construction project of its head office in Pretoria and has temporarily relocated to an office in Centurion. However, due to the limited space available for conference facilities at the temporary venue, the SAP has considered the venue of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research as a suitably conducive and accessible venue in the Pretoria vicinity. I would like to thank the shareholders for their understanding. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded for future reference if required. The meeting complies with the Protection of Personal Information Act number 4 of 2013 as shareholders were requested during registration on the Lumi Technologies South Africa Proprietary Limited platform to consent to the SAP and Lumi collating, processing, and storing their data. Before I start my address, since this is a hybrid meeting, we have shareholders attending in person and we have got shareholders who are attending online. Can I ask if everyone attending in person has signed the attendance register? Even if you are not a shareholder, please do sign the register and also indicate whom you are representing to ensure that we have a complete attendance record of this meeting. All shareholders present in person who hold 200 or more shares in the SAP and who are entitled to vote in accordance with the provisions of the SAP Act and its regulations should be in possession of an electronic voting device. Please indicate if you are a shareholder entitled to vote but have not yet registered or received a voting device. Please note that only shareholders or their valid proxies will be permitted to speak during the formalities of this meeting. Every shareholder should have received a yellow laminated card on registration. This card must please be raised for identification purposes when a shareholder wishes to comment or ask a question at this meeting. Likewise, any shareholder attending this AGM online who holds 200 or more shares in the SAP and who is entitled to vote in accordance with the provisions of the SAP Act and its regulations should vote in accordance with the instructions as outlined in the notice. Shareholders are eligible to ask written questions related to the business of the meeting by selecting the messaging icon and typing their message in the chat box at the bottom of the messaging screen. Messages can be submitted at any time prior to a matter being put to the vote. Shareholders' questions will be answered during the meeting, and both the questions and the answers will be recorded in the minutes. However, should questions from shareholders be received after the closing of the poll and question time, they will be responded to directly via email. Shareholders can also participate and ask questions using the virtual microphone option. You will be required to dial in to an operator using the number provided in your access email, and the operator will verify the eligibility of the shareholder. Once I invite the shareholder to ask a verbal question, the operator will unmute the shareholder at that point. Shareholders will still be able to continue listening to the meeting while being in the queue to ask a verbal question. Now, please allow me to introduce my colleagues who are joining us today to answer any questions that the shareholders may have. They are starting right on my left here, Deputy Governor Kuben Naidu, Deputy Governor Fundi Chasivana, Deputy Governor Rashad Kasim, Chairperson of the Audit Committee, Dr. Terence Nombembe, Chairperson of the Remuneration Committee, Dr. Yvonne Muthian, Chairperson of the Board Risk and Ethics Committee, Mr. Zoib Hussein, Chairperson of the Non-Executive Directors Committee, Ms. Lerato Mulevadzi, General Counsel, Chris van der Walt, and Acting Secretary of the SAP, Ms. Clivia Uland. The term of office of Mr. Terence Nombembe expired in July this year, and he has completed his 3 terms as the non-executive director representing government. Dr. Nombembe had joined us today as the chairperson of the audit committee during the year under review, and we thank him for his presence here today. The board has appointed Mr. Norman Mbazima to replace Dr. Nombembe as the chairperson of the audit committee with effect from the 16th of July 2023. I would like to extend a special word of thanks to Dr. Nombembe for the dedicated and valuable service he rendered to the board of directors of the SAP over his 3 terms of office and as the chairperson of the audit committee from 2020 until the end of his term. Dr. Nombembe is a very good servant of our people and is very committed to the accounting profession. Having served as Deputy Auditor General and later Auditor General in South Africa, to participating in high-level investigations in South Africa. We wish Dr. Nombembe well in his future endeavors. The President of South Africa will advise of his decision regarding this board position in due course. Now, let me turn to my formal address today. I am very pleased to be here with you in person for the first time since 2019, even if the world has changed significantly since the last time I stood before the shareholders of the South African Reserve Bank. We have survived the onslaught of COVID-19, but South Africa now faces multiple challenges of high inflation, low economic growth, and a difficult external environment. Despite the easing supply chain pressures and lower commodity prices, global inflation remains well above many central banks' targets and monetary policy remains tight. These conditions, including rising uncertainty and weak confidence, have been a drag on growth for many emerging market economies, including South Africa, whose post-pandemic recovery has been comparatively weak. Electricity shortages, infrastructure challenges, high public debt levels, and weak investments continue to weigh on growth over the medium term in South Africa. Lower commodity prices have supported disinflation, and headline inflation returned to the target range in mid-2023. However, inflation remains sticky, and the risk to the medium-term inflation outlook remains to the upside. Monetary policy continues to remain focused on retaining inflation to 4.5% over the medium term. Yet, this goal will be complicated by challenges such as the ongoing geopolitical tensions and climate change. Early in the pandemic, aggressive fiscal and monetary easing was aimed at mitigating the economic effects of the pandemic. As economic activity slowly resumed, supply chains remained severely constrained, prompting a sharp increase in global prices. The inflationary impulse was worsened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which raised the prices of important commodities such as food and oil. In response to elevated inflation, most central banks raised policy rates. Global inflation peaked in the third quarter of last year and has since moderated into the third quarter of 2023. This deterioration almost entirely reflects lower food and oil prices, alongside less binding supply constraints and tighter macroeconomic policies. However, inflation remains above central bank targets, and in the advanced economies, core inflation remains uncomfortably high, reflecting sustained spending on services, tight labor markets, and robust wage growth. While the rising interest rates triggered some banking sector volatility in the United States and the Eurozone, this appears to have diminished in recent months. These market-related stresses were not enough to derail the hiking cycles of the advanced economies, with the US Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank hiking by an additional 75 and 100 basis points, respectively, since March 2023. The persistence of inflation, despite the sustained interest rate hikes by some central banks, suggests that global neutral interest rates have risen well above their pandemic levels. As we move towards 2024, central banks around the world will be watching carefully for additional evidence of changes in neutral real rates. With global financial conditions adjusting and risk-adjusted real interest rate differentials widening, portfolio flows will become less certain, affecting the availability and the cost of external funding. These rising credit costs will further impair the financing of large fiscal and current account deficits in many emerging market and developing economies, including South Africa. Many economies have experienced sustained increases in public debt levels, which with higher inflation create serious headwinds to economic growth. As exchange rates depreciate in response to the more adverse credit conditions, imported inflation tends to rise, a trend already seen in producer prices, fuel costs, and food prices, among other items. Emerging markets and developing economies will need to consolidate their fiscal positions over the coming years, helping indirectly to reduce exchange rate pass-through pressures and inflation, and ease wide-ranging economic costs. South Africa's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic was driven by demand expansion and a supply rebound following the easing of pandemic-induced restrictions. This generated a strong but incomplete recovery from the 6% construction experienced during 2020. While growth rebounded by 4.9% in 2021, activity subsequently slowed to 2% in 2022, and by 2023, even lower growth was expected as the energy crisis facing the country worsened. The South African Reserve Bank forecasts gross domestic product growth at 0.4% this year and expects it to average about 1% over the next 2 years. South Africa's post-COVID-19 recovery reflects various domestic idiosyncrasies such as the July political unrest, disruptive strikes, extreme weather conditions, and failing infrastructure. Although load shedding entered the South African lexicon 15 years ago, it has intensified over the past 2 years, placing a binding constraint on growth. The South African Reserve Bank estimates that growth over the 2023 to 2025 period would be closer to 2% in the absence of load shedding. South Africa's underwhelming economic performance is not new. The country's chronic low growth problem predates the pandemic. In the 5-year period before COVID-19, growth averaged just 1% compared to the 3.5% growth achieved by typical emerging market economies. One of the main challenges to achieving higher growth is weak investment levels. South African investment lingers close to 16% of GDP compared to the 25% level achieved by comparative peers. From a macroeconomic perspective, a key constraint to achieving higher investment levels in South Africa is persistent fiscal de-saving. Higher public debt levels raise the risk premium, pushing up the cost of borrowing to around 11% today. The low investment problem is worsened by the composition of public spending, which is geared more towards current consumption than infrastructure. The reversal of the economy's terms of trade risks, worsening the fiscal outlook. Between January 2020 and March 2022, the prices for South Africa's major commodities such as gold, iron ore, platinum group metals and coals doubled. Since then, however, these prices have been falling consistently and by as much as 23.8% over 6 months alone. As funding needs grow and as domestic saving remains weak, the need for foreign savings has widened. The current account deficit is now expected to expand from 0.5% in 2022 to 3.3% in 2023. Headline inflation rose sharply in this past year, surpassing the upper end of the 3 to 6% inflation target band in April 2022 and reaching a 13-year high of 7.8% in July 2022. Inflation has since moderated, albeit with some volatility, and finally returned to the target band in June 2023 when it reached 5.4%. The moderation can largely be attributed to lower food and fuel prices in the recent months, as well as lower imported inflation due to easing supply chain disruptions and easing demand conditions. A more pronounced moderation in inflation is expected in the latter years of the forecast horizon, with headline inflation expected to ease to an annual average of 5% in 2024 and 4.5% in 2025. The risks to the inflation outlook are assessed to be on the upside. Rising services inflation and elevated administered price inflation continue to put upward pressure on prices. These pressures are exacerbated by elevated and rising inflation expectations by key price setters over the medium term. For example, the survey of inflation expectations by the Bureau for Economic Research shows that 2 years ahead expectations have steadily trended up from around 4.5% in 2021 to 6.3% and 5.9% for businesses and trade unions, respectively. These elevated expectations by key price setters risk feeding into the recent wage negotiations and embedding in higher core inflation. Facing this elevated persistent inflation, the SARB's Monetary Policy Committee stepped up the pace of the repurchase rate normalization over the past year, raising the repo rate by a cumulative 400 basis points since the May 2022 MPC meeting. This has brought the nominal repo rate to 8.25%. At these levels, monetary policy in South Africa is now considered restrictive. The Monetary Policy Committee continues to assess the impact of previous interest rate hikes on the economy. Monetary policy operates with a lag of approximately 12 to 24 months, with peak impacts of rate hikes between 3 and 5 quarters ahead. To date, the rate hikes have had a moderately slowing effect on credit demand, which continues to rise even after adjusting for prices. Total loans and advances to the private sector are so far this year 2% higher than they were over the first half of 2022. Credit growth to corporates remains relatively robust at 3.5%, while credit to households has slowed to real growth of 0.5%. Households' credit demand is typically comprised of mortgages which have slowed since the robust growth experienced during the COVID-19 era ultra-low interest rate environment. The rise in interest rates has pushed households' debt service costs as a share of their annual disposable income back up to its 2010 to 2019 average of about 8.5%. The broader environment in which monetary policy is made presents additional challenges to central banks. Geopolitical tensions, changes to established global value chains, and the intensifying problems of climate change are all likely to present challenges to long-term growth and relative price shocks. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been an unpleasant reminder of how rising commodity prices spill into imported inflation for various economies. These tensions continue to pose an upside risk to the inflation outlook, which is exemplified by the recent collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. Ongoing volatility in global oil and food prices risks delaying inflation back to target for many countries. While pandemic-related shocks to global supply chains continue to ease and revert to more normal conditions, established global value chains will continue to adapt to a changing global trade, industrial, and technology policy landscape. Nearshoring will likely reverse the disinflationary impulse of globalization and is expected to put upward pressure on manufactured goods vis-a-vis services over the long term. The effects on emerging markets like South Africa will be significant as deglobalization lowers productivity growth, slows the diffusion of technology, and makes it harder for economies to maintain competitiveness. Major climate events such as floods and droughts have an immediate impact on local food prices. South Africa has experienced numerous climate events, including the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal in 2022 and the Western Cape droughts of 2015 to 2018. The El Nino effect of 2015 to 2016 pushed food inflation up to about 11% in 2016, and at its reappearance later this year, risks delaying the food disinflation process. Despite the challenges of forecasting and modeling, a repeat of the 2015-2016 drought, which is a once-in-20 years event, could increase food prices by as much as 10%. For now, however, such a risk lies outside of the SAP's baseline view. In a world this volatile, it has been more important than ever that the SAP hold fast to its mandate of ensuring price stability in the interest of balanced and sustainable economic growth. Monetary policy is focused on preventing second-round effects and the risk that inflation expectations de-anchor following inflation shocks. Though the Monetary Policy Committee has paused the hiking cycle, it will act decisively to quell any inflationary pressures should they strengthen over the medium term. The priority remains that inflation reaches the midpoint of the 3 to 6% target band and stays there to best ensure balanced and sustainable economic growth in the interest of all South Africans. The SAP's role does not end with monetary policy. Let me now turn to our other legislative mandate, that of securing financial stability. The South African financial system has remained resilient amid changing global and domestic developments. However, that resilience has been tested by global monetary policy tightening, turmoil in developed markets, banking sectors, volatile financial markets, and downward revisions to growth projections. Over the past year, the SAP has been highlighting the financial stability risks associated with ongoing electricity supply shortages and upward repricing in government debt, South Africa's grey listing by the Financial Action Task Force, and the impact of escalating geopolitical tensions, notably between Russia and the Ukraine. The SARP has, however, marked some key milestones in the past year that will bolster confidence and trust in our financial system. Starting with the establishment of the Cooperation for Deposit Insurance as a legal entity on the 24th of March 2023. As the newest subsidiary of the South African Reserve Bank, which will become fully operational in April 2024, CODI will protect covered depositors in the event of a bank failure. Alongside this, the SARP became the resolution authority for designated institutions on the 1st of June 2023, which will help protect the financial system in the event of failures of systemically important financial institutions. Another cornerstone of financial stability is effective regulation of our financial institutions. Several local institutions facing particular circumstances were put under curatorship in the past year. South Africa's banking and insurance firms, as well as its market infrastructures, remain sound. In the wake of FATF grey listing the country, the Prudential Authority continues to work with other regulators and law enforcement authorities to address the remaining gaps in South Africa's oversight of money laundering, the financing of terrorism, and proliferation financing. At an operational level, the SARP met several milestones during this past year, which serves as a testament to our values of accountability, excellence, integrity, and open communication. The SARP's role as the steward of our country's national payment system is too often overlooked. The national payment system is, however, a critical infrastructure of the economy. And the SARP works hard to modernize the NPS and make it more secure, more efficient, and more accessible. In September 2022, we successfully migrated to the International Organization for Standardization's financial messaging standard, ISO 20022. The adoption of ISO 20022 enables richer, better quality data in payment processing and settlements, and is a significant step in the modernization of our payments ecosystem. A key operational development during the year was the transition to a new monetary policy implementation framework. Between the 8th of June 2022 and the 24th of August 2022, the SARP moved from a money market shortage to a money market surplus system. At the same time, banks were provided with quotas, allowing them to earn the policy rate on overnight deposits of excess reserves. The new system, formerly a tiered floor framework, is now fully operational. The reform has made monetary policy implementation simpler and more robust, while also improving the liquidity of the banking sector. We have also successfully rolled out South Africa's upgraded banknotes and fourth decimal coin series, the first new series in 34 years. The upgraded currency continues to pay homage to our first democratically elected President, Nelson Mandela, who signed into law the very constitution that gives life to the SARP's mandate and protects our independence. The SARP consults extensively with expert organizations on the use of national symbols, languages, and designs on our currency, including the Pan-South African Language Board, which is the statutory authority on our 12 official languages. Having received complaints from the members of the Vatsonga community over the spelling of the Xitsonga word for Reserve Bank used on the upgraded 100 Rand note, the SAP has reached out to the Pan South African Language Board to revisit the matter, and we await feedback. More broadly, the SAP's recent campaign to educate the public on the new security and design features helps to cement public trust and confidence in our currency. In light of the ongoing power crisis in the country, the SAP is taking the necessary actions to minimize the impact of load shedding on its operations and key financial system infrastructures. We are a people-driven organization. The SAP's ability to achieve its strategic and operational milestones is only possible because of our staff. The SAP's employee value proposition is designed to attract and retain professionals of the highest caliber with the skills and the commitment to ensure that the SAP continues working for the economic well-being of all South Africans. Our diversity and inclusion program, now in its third year, is helping us build a more diverse leadership pipeline and an organization that embraces the unique lived experiences of its employees. The SAP continues to embed hybrid working principles as the head office renovation project gathers pace. In this final phase of the diversity and inclusion program, organization-wide workshops are underway to tackle issues around generational diversity, racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation, and sexual harassment. As we know, diverse organizations are more resilient and more responsive and better placed to serve the public. That spirit of public service extends to our engagements with stakeholders through our economic roundtables, through our publications, through our investor sessions, through monetary policy and financial stability forums, as well as our corporate social investment work. Our CSI efforts are geared towards broadening the understanding of monetary policy, growing the pool of skills in areas such as economics and finance, and supporting people from disadvantaged communities. This includes bursaries for 102 students from first year to master's level and partnerships with 4 universities to develop programs that focus on monetary policy, financial stability, and economic journalism. As I draw this to a close, I would like to say that as the SAP is now approaching the final stretch of its strategy 2025, I am pleased that significant progress has been made in its implementation. Despite the prevailing global and domestic economic conditions, we remain on course to deliver against our 5 strategic focus areas and the enablement functions that support our strategy. As I indicated earlier, high inflation remains a concern and played a significant role in the SAP's inability to achieve its target set out in Strategic Focus Area 1, which is keeping inflation within the target range of 3 to 6. Appropriate monetary policy actions have contributed to an easing of inflation, with the consumer price index at 5.4% in June 2023. This again underscores the SAP's commitment to price stability. Enhancing resilience to external shocks, the basis of Strategic Focus Area 4, also proved challenging in the face of high government debt levels. Despite the many challenges to central banking that have emerged in recent years, both globally and domestically, I am confident that we have the human capacity to analyze those challenges and to work together with our partners in the public and private sectors to increase the resilience of our economy and financial system to meet any challenges head on. In this ongoing process, central banks need to remain focused on their core mandates as the best way to ensuring that the economy can grow. We must hold fast to our mandate of ensuring price stability in the interest of balanced and sustainable economic growth. And we must do so without fear, favor, or prejudice. In doing so, we will ensure that the economy has a stable foundation, one that is resilient and flexible in addressing the many challenges we undoubtedly continue to face. I would like to express a heartfelt thank you to all the staff of the SAP and its subsidiaries, because they have done and continue to do what is expected from committed public servants. Their commitment and dedication means that we can count a number of successes achieved during the past year, despite all the challenges. We can expect that the months ahead will test us in new ways. But with this team of dedicated individuals, I know we will uphold our century-long legacy of working for the good of South African people. Thank you very much for your attention. I would now like us to turn to the formal business of the day, which covers the following matters. Firstly, to receive and accept the minutes of the AGM held on the 29th of July 2022. Secondly, to receive and consider the SAP's annual financial statements for the financial year ended 31 March 2023, including the Director's report and the Independent External Auditor's report. Thirdly, to approve the remuneration of the SAP's independent external auditors, namely PricewaterhouseCoopers Incorporated and SNG Grant Thornton Incorporated, for completing the audit for the 2022-2023 financial year in terms of Regulation 22(1)B, read with Regulation 7(3)C of the regulations. Fourthly, to approve the appointment of BDO South Africa Incorporated and SNG Grant Thornton Incorporated as the SAP's independent external auditors for 2023-2024 financial year in terms of Regulation 22(1)A, read with Regulation 7(3)C of the regulations. The South African Reserve Bank's Audit Committee has recommended the appointment of the new firm, BDO, together with the reappointment of SNG Grant Thornton Incorporated. Fifthly, to elect one non-executive director to serve on the SAF board. Finally, to consider any further business that may arise from the items mentioned in terms of Regulation 7.3E of the regulations. I can confirm that the Acting Secretary of the SAP has not received any request for special business in terms of Regulation 7.3D of the regulations. I now invite the Acting Secretary of the SAP, Ms. Livia Uland, to confirm the shareholder representation at this meeting.
Confirm that the total number of shares in the issued share capital of the SARB is 2 million. 36 shareholders are currently present online and in person. 4 shareholders are represented by proxy, and 585 votes are exercisable by the shareholders present online and in person and those holding duly certified proxy forms for this purpose.
I have determined that voting on each of the matters under consideration at this AGM will take place by means of a poll. This hybrid meeting, as well as the voting procedure, are being facilitated by an independent external party, LUMI. All the shareholders attending this AGM, either in person or online, who hold 200 or more shares in the SAP and who are entitled to vote in accordance with the provisions of the Sub-Act and its regulations will be allowed to vote at any time before the vote is closed. Since this is a hybrid meeting, can I please request Mr. Andrzej Vlada from Lumi to come forward to outline the housekeeping rules and to instruct those shareholders present in person and virtually on how to use the platforms. Andrzej?
Thank you, Governor, and good morning. Good morning to the Deputy Governors, the Board, shareholders, and guests, both in person and online. As the Governor has mentioned, this is a hybrid meeting, so we do need to be cognizant of the fact that we have shareholders and guests both in the room as well as online. This meeting is being streamed out to 3 platforms, so widely publicized. And it's my task today to just do some housekeeping with regards to the use of the various platforms that we'll be making use of at this meeting. So to start off with the voting, which is the important aspect of what we are doing here. For those of you in the room, I'll start with you first. For those that are present in the room and eligible to vote and have chosen to vote at this AGM, you would have received a handset as well as a smart card at registration. You will notice that the voting is currently open on the devices. You'll see that we are running what's known as a multi-motion vote. So we are running 2 test resolutions at the same time. On your screen, you will see the 2 resolutions appearing on your screen. You'll notice that the device does look like an old BlackBerry, so hopefully everybody is quite familiar with it. And what you will do is you'll use the trackball to scroll between the resolutions available to you, preferably start on test resolution 1, and click on the trackball, press on the trackball to highlight test resolution 1. You'll see the resolution text, and then you press the green button if you wish to vote on that resolution. You'll then be given the options to vote 1 for or in favor, 2 to vote against, or 3 to abstain from voting. You can then enter your vote, press the green button, and it will take you to the next resolution in the queue. Once you've completed all the resolutions in the queue, you will get a final screen that shows you all the resolutions you voted on, as well as how you voted for them. You can change your mind at any point by going back to one of the resolutions, clicking on it, and re-entering your new vote. This can be done at any point while the poll is open. Once the poll is closed, the voting will disappear and your final choice will be the choice that is taken. For those of you that are online, you'll have a similar way to vote. You'll notice that a voting tab has appeared on your screen next to the broadcast, and you too will have each resolution one under the other. You can click on the option that you wish to make. You will get a received message, and there is no submit button required. And that's how the voting will work. We will allow you to test your voting for now while I proceed with the other housekeeping rules with regards to the meeting. So with regards to Q&A, when we get to Q&A, I will again start with those in the room. You will notice that in front of you are table mics. Please be sure to firstly raise your yellow shareholder card when you wish to ask a question. When the chair acknowledges you and asks you to ask your question, please make sure that you lift the mic up, press the button, the microphone button on the table mic. You'll see a red light and you will then be able to speak. Critically, when you're done, please press that button again. A limited amount of these table mics can be active at the same time, so please make sure that you turn yours off when you're done. For those of you online, you have 2 abilities to ask questions. You have the ability to message in questions, so you can go to the messaging tab, type your question in the messaging box, and then hit send. You also have the ability on your broadcast screen to click on the request to speak button. When you click on that, your broadcast will temporarily disappear. You will then dial into an operator, ask them to put you into the queue for the Reserve Bank meeting. And once you're in the queue, you will be able to hear the proceedings of the meeting. And once you hear the governor ask you to ask your question, we will unmute you and you will then be able to ask your question. Once you're done asking your question, please stay on the line in case that you need to make a follow-up to that. But once that is all completed, you can then click the Return to Broadcast button to get back to where we are in the proceedings in the broadcast. For those of you in the room, if you are struggling with anything, please raise your hand or your yellow shareholder card. My colleagues in the room will be able to assist you. For those of you online, we do have email support as well as WhatsApp support, which you'll find on the home screen. We do have staff manning that for you to be able to get assistance with anything that you might be struggling with. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Governor.
No results of the test resolutions.
Oh, sorry, Governor. Sorry, Stephen, if you could close the results so we can see those. My apologies. Right, so for test resolution 1, we have 324 votes in favor and 57 votes against, and that resolution is carried. Next one. Test resolution 2, we have 179 votes in favor, 95 votes against, and 58 votes in abstention. Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, Andres. We now proceed to the business of this meeting. Voting will start on the first 4 ordinary resolutions, namely the acceptance of the minutes of the 2022 AGM. Secondly, the acceptance of the annual financial statements for the year ended 31 March 2023. Thirdly, approval of the remuneration of the SAP's independent external auditors in the amount of 22,980,039 rands, excluding value-added tax. And fourthly, the appointment of BDO and SNG Grant Thornton Incorporated as the SAP's independent external auditors for 2023-2024 financial year in terms of Regulation 22(1)A, read with Regulation 7(3)C of the regulations. The voting will now be opened, and you could exercise your vote. Feel free to ask any question with respect to these resolutions if you're stuck. I don't see anything on the questions. Are there any online? No, not on these resolutions. Who's there? Yes, sir.
I just want to ask a question in relation to the cryptocurrency, which I wonder if it is a relevant question.
No, it's not in the.
Okay.
We are dealing with questions with respect to. If you could just
Okay.
hold back on that, because we did deal with it in the address, so we can deal with it at the end.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, can we proceed and vote? The polls are open, and they will be closing in. One more to go. Still one person must vote. Oh, done. Thank you very much. The poll is now closed. And the results. The results are for 100% for the adoption of the resolutions, 0 against and 2 abstentions, so the resolution carries. I now turn to the matter of the election of one non-executive director to the board of the SAP. The term of Ms. Makiaya Mahoro Trifosa Ramano as a non-executive director with knowledge and skills in commerce and or finance expires at this AGM. Ms. Ramano is eligible and available for re-election by the shareholders for another term of 3 years. The panel appointed in terms of Section 4(1)(c) of the SAP Act considered the nominations for this vacancy. This panel comprises of myself as the chair, retired Constitutional Court Judge Baitsi Elizabeth Nkabinde, and Professor Dion Rousseau, Chief Executive Officer of the Ethics Institute of South Africa, all three of them appointed by the Minister of Finance. And it also includes Mr. Kaiser Moyani, Mr. Tulani Chifuta, and Ms. Lebogang Mulaiti, all three appointed by National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLAC. The panel has confirmed that one candidate for consideration by the shareholders for the one vacancy was eligible as well as fit and proper to stand for election as director of the sub-board in terms of Section 4(1)(g) of the SAP Act. The CV of this one candidate was sent to the shareholders together with the notice of the meeting. Are there any questions? Any questions online? Well, there being no questions, I proceed to ask you to exercise your vote by voting for or against or abstain for Ms. Ramano. The poll is now open and we'll proceed with the director's election. The poll is now closed, and the results are (76%, 76.82% for 23.18% against, and 1 vote abstained. And so the resolution carries. Normally you think that these things are completed until your lawyer comes. The 4 resolutions that we had voted is that I announced one result and you want me to announce the voting for each one of those 4. So can you for the record go to that so that I can confirm them so that they can be entered on the record before I get into legal trouble? So the results for Resolution 2, I only announced Resolution 1. Resolution 2, 100% basically for. There are 523 votes and 5 abstentions. Resolution 3, 496 votes for, 27 against, and 5 abstentions. And resolution 4, the 100% for. So we entered that into the record. With respect to resolution 5, which is the election of the director, on the basis of those voting results, I now declare that Ms. Ramano has been re-elected as a non-executive director with knowledge and skills in commerce or finance. Ms. Ramano is congratulated on her re-election as a non-executive director. In terms of Section 5 of the Sub-Act, this appointment shall be effective from 29 July 2023 to the day after the AGM in 2026. This concludes the voting procedure for the day, and I would like to thank Lumi for their assistance and contribution. As mentioned earlier, the acting secretary of the SAP has not received any requests for the shareholders for special business to be placed on the agenda of this meeting in line with the regulations. Are there any questions or comments arising from matters under consideration at this meeting, including the governor's address? Sir, if you could identify yourself. I can see you are a shareholder.
Well, my name is Marang Tebogo Mamashlodi, and I'm a shareholder. So, Governor, I just want to ask a question relating to cryptocurrency. My question is there any legislative statement or any policy relating to cryptocurrency in our country? And some of us, we are actually victims of that in a scam way. So hence I'm asking if there's any legislative policy or statement.
We first issued a cautionary and said to people, be careful as you trade in these things because there is no legislative or regulatory framework underpinning them. It was a global phenomenon, a global discussion of how you treat crypto assets. Through the engagement between the SAP, the National Treasury, and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, crypto assets were thus declared financial products. And once they are declared financial products, then they would have to be regulated in terms of the legislation. This is an evolving area globally, and there are polarizations varying from ban these things to just warn people not to be involved there to maybe you should regulate these things. There is a strong case why they should be regulated, including how they are used in money laundering, financing of terrorism, financing of proliferation, and that you can't just look away. Be careful out there in trading in products that are not covered by regulation because you will not have protection. Sir, do you have a card? You need a shareholder card, the yellow one.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Yanni Rousseau. I have two questions, one on banknotes and one on monetary policy. On banknotes, we now have the new banknotes just issued and the previous series. Whenever I speak to audiences, I now get the question, why do we get a different feel from the money? Why does it feel differently? And somebody even told me it smells differently. I can't judge on the smell, but to the touch, it feels differently. Is it the ink, is it the substrate, or is it just an illusion? That's my first question. Should I continue with my second question? On monetary policy, Governor, as you know, I'm against inflation. I believe inflation is ungood. And if you have any doubt, inflation is ungood. You know it from what I say in public and wherever. I'm against inflation. However, there's a lot of pressure on the Reserve Bank as of late because of higher interest rates. I think I'm the only economist speaking on interest rates still supporting the Reserve Bank in the media, be that as it may. My question really is, whenever interest rates are increased, we understand that people with debt will pay higher interest rates. However, can the Reserve Bank not, at the time of adjusting interest rate upwards, in its statement make very clear that this will be beneficial to people who save, people who have deposits in the bank, people who earn interest? In other words, higher interest rates not being a net loss to the economy, but yes, of course, detrimental to those with debt, but beneficial to those who save, who have money in the bank, who earn interest, to give a more balanced debate around interest rates. Please, Governor, if you can consider that in future announcements. Thank you.
Thank you. I see the gentleman next to you is nodding, which suggests that both of you are pensioners. But Yanni, you've summed it up. I do not understand why the way in which political leaders speak, they speak as if the only people who elect them are borrowers. Doesn't look like the savers matter. But take away savers. Once the savers have stopped saving, who will the borrowers borrow from? Because they need the borrowers. But thank you very much for the suggestions. We will be nuanced in the announcement. Nobody is speaking for the savers, and thank you very much for raising the savers. And as you heard in my address, we have got huge financing needs. So the more savers we have, the better we would be able to meet our financing needs. And the bank notes that you've talked about, of course, new bank notes smell differently. So we expected that will happen, and they are crispier. They might feel, they feel differently, and we had to consult extensively with the people who rely on feel with the notes. One thing you could be assured of is that this notes will last longer than the previous one because the technology on the substrate has moved. Initially, I thought that even because at one stage we were discussing whether these things should be hybrid, but it says no, the cotton technology has moved, and now cotton substrate is more durable, and it was probably meant to compete with polymer. So use the nodes with the comfort that you can keep them longer without having to worry about them getting soiled too easily. The quality of the substrate has been upped, but thank you very much for that. Any other questions in the room? Yes, why is your microphone not coming on?
Right, I hope the technology has now been defeated. My yellow card sent off the field for 10 minutes for obstruction. I'd like to ask, Governor, there's quite a few central banks around the world that are encouraging sustainable investment or investment in green, clean energy projects and so on through the banking system by providing some level of accommodation to banks who do lend into sustainable investment projects. Has the Reserve Bank considered this at all?
Okay, we do not have much investing to do as the Reserve Bank. We only have our reserves to invest. And the reserves have to be in assets that are liquid and secure for us, that when we need those reserves, we will be able to call them. So that is not where we are playing. Are we oblivious to the challenge of climate that is facing the world? No, we are not oblivious. The South African Reserve Bank participates in two important fora. One is the task team on climate disclosures, and that task team in climate disclosures makes central banks in their supervisory processes to ask the regulated sector to take account of climate risks in their activities and the extent to which it might put a challenge on their capital and liquidity. The other, which started as a small group of central banks and has been growing in leaps and bounds, is the network for the greening of the financial sector. So it moves beyond just the disclosures to looking at what the central banks should be doing and what the institutions they regulate are doing. For our own domestically, we had to ask the question, what would be the impact of climate change on the financial sector? And it made for interesting assessment. You'd find that the insurers are the readiest because they deal with these things all the time. And when I was addressing, I said El Nino happens once every, it's a once in 20-year event. Just looking back, if the last time it happened here was 2015, 2016, and if there is a likelihood it will come now, it looks like it is coming earlier. So the frequency with which these extreme weather events, whether it's drought or floods or chaos, has actually increased and has also become erratic. So the challenges of climate change are here with us. We had also done a stress test of the banking sector to look at the banking sector and say, how are you dealing with this? And as I said, the insurance sector seemed to be more prepared. We will drill in deeper under stress scenarios, but that means that the challenge that I face now is that I need more than just economists and accountants and finance professionals in the Reserve Bank. I now need some climatologists because we must try and figure out when these things are going to happen. And I don't even know what I look for in a climatologist if I have to go and employ one. So it's a big challenge for central banks. So testing the resilience of the financial sector to the climate shocks becomes important. The other aspect is that we have got a price stability mandate. These shocks lead to extreme price movements. And as we would normally say that we try to look through a shock and say, we could have said, this is a once in a 20-year time, we will look through this, it's gone, and then we must proceed. But if it happens with frequency, it starts to be embedded into the price formation processes of the price setters. And once that happens, then climate change moves being just a physical risk. It also becomes a risk to financial stability and also a risk to economic activity. And that is how we actually think about these things. There is no free lunch. I know you're going to have lunch after this. You must be ready to answer. Let me go back online before I come back into the room and see. There looks like, I don't know how many questions are there. There were earlier questions, they disappeared. I don't know how I will go back to them. Okay, let me start with Chweni Yan Moranwa's question. On the 10 cents dividend cap, is it fair that the 10 cents does not reflect the time value of money. 10 cents of 1921 with the rent pegged to the pound is not the same as the 10% of 2023. I get the question may seem academic at the moment given the dividends declared in the recent past. Is there a legal opinion on this, or can one be obtained? No, we do not need any legal opinion. The law, you read it the way it is written, and the law is written such that the dividend per share is kept at 10 cents per annum. That sums the discussion. That sums the discussion. So as the shareholder, you have got the 10 cents. What the Reserve Bank can do is to keep inflation below 10% so that at least your dividend does not get eroded quicker. But the law is very clear on this one. We cannot change this 10-cent dividend. But we would like to thank you very much, Mr. Moganwa, for holding on to your sub-shares. We appreciate it very much. Putala Jane Mieni says geomorphologists might be suitable to assist with tracking the impact of climate change. Thank you very much for that suggestion. I don't know what geomorphologists do, but we will welcome them. Christine Numalo says that the primary mandate, yes, we know that. Does this not, however, include how banks engage with its clients, meaning that monitoring of funds coming in and out of bank accounts, which was learned through the Judicial Commission, have resulted in banks being involved in state capture and so forth? No, it doesn't include that. That is the price stability mandate. The Financial Sector Regulations Act gives us another responsibility with respect to financial institutions, and is to make sure that they are safe and sound, so that when you go back and you say, my money please, you can find it. If the banks are not treating customers fairly, it becomes what we call a market conduct issue. And in the case of South Africa, the issues of market conduct are dealt with by another regulator, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. And that is who has responsibility for making sure that not just banks, but all financial users of financial products are treated fairly. It looks like the only people online are Ms. Numalo and Ms. Moganwa. I'll take last two from each one of them. Could research of language matter regarding banknotes not be addressed before? Is it not unprofessional and money wasting? No, we embarked on this thing. The Pan-South African Language Board is the authority on these matters. Once they pronounce, that is what the Reserve Bank goes with. The discussions about language, there are contestations, not just across languages, but within any language, there are preferences of certain words to other words. The central bank is not the final arbiter on this. There is a statutory body whose job it is to pronounce on this, is the Pan-South African Language Board, and once they pronounce, that is who we go with. Putela Muyeni, general elections scenarios, very, very good question. That must be answered by the politicians, not by us. Mr. Ahmed, should the SAP consider increasing dividends? We have dealt with that. If structural reforms were implemented on condition that government tenders are suspended, is there a potential that high unemployment rate can be brought down? It is the National Treasury that deals with those. Thank you very much. Gold mining around Witwatersrand Basin 200 years, with Gauteng being the ground stability is a major risk. not for the central bank. Ms. Muyeni, if inflation in South Africa was to be as high as 80% due to factors outside of what can be done now to prevent inflation situations similar to Argentina? Alternatively, if inflation was as low as 0.5%, how would all South Africans benefit from long-term sustained growth? Would you rather buy a loaf of bread for 20 rands, or would you prefer to buy it for 100 rand? If you prefer to buy it for 20 rands rather than 100 rands, then you would prefer inflation to be at 0.5% and not at 80%. Will we become Argentina? My understanding of the Spanish language is pretty poor, but I can tell you that if inflation was to get de-anchored, you don't have to tell the Reserve Bank that we had failed to contain inflation. It would mean that we have disregarded our constitutional mandate, and we are not about to do that. And so we leave it there and say to you that the reason why we acted as early as November 2021 was to make sure that inflation does not run away from us. Hindsight is perfect, but we do not know. If we didn't act, where would inflation have been? My hunch is it would have been much higher than what we have seen. So, to quote a former South African Reserve Bank official, inflation is ungood. Okay, those were the questions. Thank you very much. We can only take it this far. You are in the room, that will be the last one. Flip your microphone and press the green button.
Thank you, Governor. I have some questions that I wanted just to pose, maybe to get clarity on some issues that I think that they need, I need nonetheless to have clarity on. Like one, the agenda nonetheless of the Reserve Bank around the transformation of the financial services sector, or the financial services in general, banking and the financial services. Now, I wanted to check what is it exactly that is the agenda of the current board, the stance of the current board approaching the transformation agenda, specifically the barriers for entry in the financial services. Like for one, who wants to enter into the financial services? Like for an example, opening up a bank. Historically disadvantaged individuals, those who want to enter into that particular sector, what are they, therefore, the board did nonetheless to address those particular barriers, both in the services and in the banking? That is one, Governor. The second one is the one that seeks to speak to the developmental agenda, nonetheless, of the Reserve Bank with regards to the supplier development program that is there, that is in place. How is it exactly assisting to address, nonetheless, the imbalances that we are finding ourselves in, Governor? I saw that we were voting, nonetheless, one on the appointment of the service provider, one being BDO, knowingly that BDO is a wide-owned company, construction major. Where are the black companies? Where are they finding themselves within such particular space, Chair? The third one is that one that seeks to speak to the development and the loss of skills, specifically the ones that is care in the financial services. What is it exactly that the Reserve Bank is doing to intervene or to compel banks, since they're getting license from the Reserve Bank, to develop those skills for people, those who are historically being disadvantaged to find themselves within that particular space.
Thank you. Kuben, you can talk to the development agenda, supplier development. You can talk. Fundi, I want you to talk about this agenda for transformation and the barriers to entry. But before she gets there, I am referring this question to Fundi because she is the CEO of the Prudential Authority. The board has got no responsibility with respect to prudential regulation. They have got no responsibility with licensing. Their job is an oversight board, is a governance board that oversees the functioning of the Reserve Bank in as far as governance matters are concerned. Policy is the responsibility of the governor and the 3 deputy governors. The board has nothing to do with that. So you can hold us accountable, but the boards, they've done their job. Okay? A service provider, BDO, is a big construction company. That would be a disaster for us to appoint a construction company to be our auditor. BDO is an accounting services firm. It's an auditor. And the other company appointed with them is SNG Thornton. SNG stands for Sizwe Ntsaluba and Gobodo. It's a black firm. And so we have always deliberately, there is nothing in legislation that requires us to have 2 auditors, but we have always had 2 auditors because we wanted to have an emerging audit firm to share part of the audit. I have never understood transformation to mean that if you are not black, you can't do business with the bank. The framework is very clear of what we have got to take account of. Skills in the financial sector, you know that banks operate under license. And one of the things is that they must have the capacity to run these banks. That means people. But there is nothing in the licensing conditions that says that they must go and do skills development. Skills development is covered in another piece of legislation that has got nothing to do with the central bank. I would struggle to find any private sector institution, whether within the financial sector or outside of the financial sector, that would think that they do not have a responsibility to develop their own resources. Because if they do not develop their own human resources, they are soon going to go out of business because you need people to do these jobs. So Fundi and then Kubel, and then that is it, and then we are going to have a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Governor. So just to talk about the mandate that we have. So in terms of the Financial Sector Regulation Act, we are responsible for ensuring the safety and soundness of the financial system as a SARB. As a prudential authority, we then look at individual institutions. So that is the broad mandate that we have. Within that, we then need to look at issues of financial inclusion. We need to look at issues of competition, but also look at transformation very broadly. And it is always within the context, of course, of the safety and the soundness. So when we license an institution, and I'm going to touch on this issue of barriers of entry because you've highlighted that. We are implementing the law as it stands, remember, as the Prudential Authority. We do not draft the law. That policy mandate sits at the National Treasury. We've got different deposit-taking institutions. There is work that the Treasury is doing, looking at whether we've got enough of a variety of deposit-taking institutions. We've got cooperative financial institutions, which I would say are the entry level of deposit-taking institution. We also have cooperative banks, we have mutual banks, and then we have got the commercial banking license, which is different. So all of these entities can accept deposits on license. We then make sure as the Prudential Authority that those deposits are kept safe. So that is what they get licensed to do. What changes is what else do the deposit-taking institutions do in addition to accepting the deposits? So who can they lend to? What are the types of other businesses they can embark on? And those other types of deposits sometimes those other types of activities sometimes can bring in the risk to the depositors. So we make sure that when we are licensing, we look at the capability that the institution is bringing in. So it would be the management capability. It would also be the board capability that comes in. Because depending on the type of institution that you have, the types of risks that they're going to be embarking on, you want to have sufficient levels of expertise. So that's an important element as part of the licensing. We do not limit the number of banks that can enter. As long as you can meet the requirements, we consider as the South African Reserve Bank, as the Prudential Authority in that context, does the applicant meet the criteria? And that's how licensing is done. We benefit a lot, and we've seen a lot of benefit as we've had multiple players come into the space here in South Africa. We now have 6 large banks. We have other smaller banks that exist. There is room for different product offerings, catering for different customers and customer needs. So we certainly see a benefit to having competition and multiple players in. Can more be done? Yes. More can be done. That is work that the National Treasury is doing, looking at whether we can have more types or different types of deposit-taking institutions that are there. Now, to complement what we do as the Prudential Authority, there's the work that DG Naidu and the payments team does, which is looking at multiple payment platforms, which is what has encouraged growth in other countries where you have different payment mechanisms that come in, competing with the banks. And I think that there is work that is being done there. On the transformation agenda, the banks have got direct obligations, remember, which are linked to their employment equity obligations to the Department of Labor, so they need to report in that way. We have engagements with them on an ongoing basis so that we understand how are they managing talent broadly within the banks, and also ensuring that where opportunities are available, that the banks are taking transformation into account. But they have got direct responsibility to report via the Department of Labor. They've got requirements in terms of their employment equity legislation directly. So that would apply to the banks, it would apply to the insurers, it would apply to all of the players that are in the financial sector. We've got some way to go. It's not necessarily easy. It's to move as quickly as we would like. You can't go to a bank and say, that CEO must go. It's the bank board that needs to look at its own requirements, but we are starting to see progress being made in the banking system. It's slower. I think we all recognize that it is slower. It's slower in insurance, but we're starting to see inroads where we might not be seeing a change in the top, but in the middle layers, we are also starting to see talent and potential to be moving into more senior
You can pass the
roles within
microphone
the
to
bank
Kubes.
system.
Thank you, Fundi. Thank you, Chair. Three small points. The one is that the South African Reserve Bank is not a public entity in terms of the PFMA, so therefore we're not directly, we don't have to comply with the preferential procurement legislation in Parliament because we're not a public entity. We are, however, part of the broader public service, and we are committed to transformation of our supplier development program, our supplier network, and the people who we buy from. In the annual report, there's a fairly detailed account of our procurement and the transformation points that we have in the procurement spend. What I can say is that A, it is not easy to do this for two simple reasons. One is the two largest area of procurement in the Reserve Bank is, or in the broader Reserve Bank group, is in the currency area. And most of the substrate, the thing that the banknotes are printed on is not made in South Africa. But nevertheless, within that, we have an extensive process of trying to increase the proportion of goods and services we buy from historically disadvantaged South Africans. In the annual report, you'll see that at the moment, out of a maximum of 27, we've got a score of 22 in terms of the transformation of our supplier development and our supplier database. That's pretty good for a firm, for an organization like the SARB, but we're continuously striving to try and improve on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for all that. That concludes the questions, and we come to an end. I understand that Mr. Fani Titi, the Group Chief Executive of Investec, would like to say a few words before we disembark.
Governor, Deputy Governors, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On this occasion of the 103rd Ordinary Annual General Meeting of its shareholders, and on behalf of the entities it regulates, it is my privilege to express our deepest gratitude to the Reserve Bank for its outstanding and globally recognized work. Over the past year, the bank steered South Africa's inflation rate back to within the target range, as the Governor said, achieving this challenging task earlier than many developing economies' central banks. Thanks to highly competent regulation by the Prudential Authority, South Africa's financial system is well capitalized and a model of disciplined risk management. In the face of extreme global and domestic uncertainty, as the Governor spoke about earlier, the bank has focused squarely on its mandate and maintained its independence while consulting regularly with government. Indeed, the competence and autonomy of our central bank underpins our nation's credit ratings and would support even higher ratings if not for structural impediments to economic growth. Declining productivity over the past decade, the effect of state capture, poor governance, and the hollowing out of state institutions has been exacerbated by a sharp increase in government debt that the Governor also spoke about earlier. High bond yields have crowded out fixed investments that typically carry higher risk and often lower returns, particularly in a low-growth economy. In stark contrast, the period between 1999 and 2008 saw rapid expansion of private sector and declining unemployment, evidence of what can be achieved through sound policies that support productive investment. Successful infrastructure investment, free of corruption and bureaucratic inefficiencies, has a twofold benefit: increasing the productive capacity of the economy while contributing directly to growth and employment through built programs. The just transition to renewable energy, and there was a question earlier today on this issue, which is so crucial for South Africa's sustainable development, presents an important opportunity for such large-scale productive investment. The Reserve Bank is at the leading edge of facilitating this through its participation in the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system, as the Governor said earlier as well. And the Governor added that they do participate in TCFD, which is really crucial in this area of endeavor. South Africa's grey listing by the Financial Action Task Force highlights the need for improved measures to prevent money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing. We applaud the SARB's progress in risk-based supervision of designated non-financial businesses and its invaluable assistance to law enforcement agencies seeking to bring financial criminals to book. Looking ahead, the partnership between the presidency and the private sector to address the crisis in energy, freight, transport, and high crime levels is key to removing impediments to economic growth. Equally critical is the need to bolster investor confidence. To achieve this, property rights must be strengthened, not undermined. As an institution with a deep understanding of long and short-term risks, the bank serves as a critical bellwether, calling out unintended consequences of policies such as, for instance, expropriation without compensation and the proposed nationalization of private healthcare under the NHI. The Reserve Bank's sterling performance in the past year highlights its standing as one of our country's proudest and most capable institutions. We thank the board, Governor Khenyago, deputy governors and staff for their leadership, integrity, and resilience. Your dedication sets an inspiring example to all institutions serving our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Titi, for those kind words. We will convey to the other staff who are not online or in the room as well. To the best of my knowledge, all the business included in the agenda for today's meeting are dispensed with, and so that being the case, then I would like to bring this to the end. The business included in the agenda of today is closed. Excuse me, are you sleeping? Maybe now is for me to do my own thanks. I would like to thank President Ramaphosa and Deputy President Mashatile, the government and the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa for their continued support. The sound working relationship between National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank has continued, and I would like to thank the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. David Masonto, and the Acting Director General, Mr. Ismail Momoniat, as well as the staff of the National Treasury for their ongoing support. Sincere appreciation is also due to Deputy Governors Naidu, Chasivana, and Kasim, as well as the entire management and staff of the SARB for their continued dedication and support during what was once a very challenging year. I would like to thank them all for their contributions. I'm confident that their continued efforts will ensure that the coming year is even more successful. Thank you to all the shareholders and guests for your attendance and participation in this AGM. I trust that the SARB can continue to count on your participation in the future. I now declare the 103rd Annual Ordinary General Meeting of the shareholders of the South African Reserve Bank closed. Shareholders and guests will all be ushered to the dining hall where refreshments will be served. The meeting is adjourned.